the planting season, we usually see a food price spike. And that was what led to the aggressive month-on-month food inflation we saw in 2017. But if you study the consumer price index data for February 2018, you will see that we are seeing very subtle food price pressure, you know, partly because we had a very strong harvest season in 2017. FAO data for grain production in Nigeria showed that we had a surge in grains producers in the economy in 2017 from where we were in 2016. So if you take this into consideration, that we're going to continue seeing further subtle food price movements, while the core index also remains stable, probably driven by the stable FX rate environment, then with the consistent deterioration in inflation, and also the possibility of a policy rate cut in the near term, there should still be ample room for there to be a further rally in the fixed income market before year end. But there's a downside risks to this because by the time we enter the second half of the year, we're going to enter the political season. Primary elections are due for October, and typically for most frontier countries such as Nigeria, we usually see from portfolio flows reversal during the peak of politicking, particularly ahead of elections. So that may probably lead to some FPR outflows. But based on the level of external reserves that we have right now, we think the CBN will aggressively defend the currency. And we also have enough domestic participants in the fixed income market to even ensure that the demand for fixed income instruments remains strong, despite the FPI flow reversals we expect to see in the second half of the year.
Okay, now let's look at the equity market. Well, while the fixed income seem to be bullish, the equity market, in contrast, has been underperforming in the recent week. Now, so how do you see this market reacting to the MPC decision and perhaps a forward guidance on policy rates?
For the equity market, in the recent weeks, performance has been very lackluster. We've been seeing aggressive profit taking in the markets on the earlier rate that we saw in January. We're also seeing subtle decline in portfolio flows as well, as reviewed by recent NSC data on portfolio flow dynamics in the markets in recent months. And the reason for this I think it's caught in two ways. First, we have seen some very strong earnings missed by companies in the most recent earnings season.
But that didn't move the investors.
Yeah, it didn't move. We saw some very positive earnings surprises as well, but investors hardly reacted to it. Partly because for the first time in 3 years, we're now seeing dividend yield reported by companies in single digits. Last year, because of the level of valuation, valuations were very cheap last year because of the macroeconomic, the weak macro fundamentals and very weak portfolio flows. So between 2014 and 2016, we are seeing very high dividend yield that typically led to very strong performance in the equity market during earnings season. But this time around in the earnings season, we have some very strong earnings performance, but dividend yields are falling to single digits. And investors are just getting accustomed to this. So that led to some very, to some skepticism in the market. And there's also there's also an aspect of the prospects for forward earnings. Last year, most of the earnings results were driven by increase in prices by manufacturing companies, and also the aggressive positioning in the fixed income markets by banks as well. But this time around, with inflation pressures almost subduing, we do not expect the same level of price increases by companies to compensate for margin decline as we saw in 2017. So all this skepticism on forward earnings is also filtering into the current valuation of the market. But regardless of what the MPC decides, we think that the weak sentiment will probably continue in the very near term, but we remain very confident of medium-term performance for the equity market because we have a very strong, because number one, with the decline in fixed income use we are seeing, the cost of equity, which we use in valuing equity securities, is also declining. So the opportunity cost for investing in the equity markets is declining as well. So that should probably lead to some strong portfolio rebalancing and tilting towards the equity markets in the medium term for companies, for portfolio managers rather.
Okay. Now, there have been some concerns in some quarters as to the potential impact of easy monetary policy on banks' earnings. Do you share the same sentiment?
The concerns are not misplaced because if you looked at the major drivers of performance for banks last year, you will see that interest income was a major component. Because of the tight monetary policy by the CBN in the last 2 years, banks' interest incomes have, they have surged because they have invested heavily in government securities and also the OMO bills as well. But this time around, since the beginning of the year, we've been seeing, further deceleration, further decline rather, in fixed income yields, so which is probably filtering into market expectation of forward earnings for banks. But despite that, I think for us at AfriInvest, we think that the impact might not be as much as the market is anticipating because banks could easily compensate for the decline in government securities with further credit extension in order to support their interest income. And if you look at the prospects for the economy in the near term, because we are now seeing much more better growth ahead, banks could use that, would take advantage of that to extend more loans to the real sector to compensate for that decline in government securities. So it's a major concern, right, for the market, but we think that the banks have their balance sheet structure is still very resilient enough to withstand the shock that will come from declining government securities. In addition to that, declining fixed income use also would increase the mark-to-market position or gains on their trading assets as well, which they have in very heavy portion. In addition to that, because of the improving macroeconomic fundamentals, the level of impairments being taken by banks on their loan portfolio will also reduce. So even though we might not see aggressive or double-digit growth in gross earnings, because of the fact that their impairment charges are declining, the impact on their net margin might not be so much as market is anticipating.
All right. Thank you very much, Omotola, for your time. Omotola Abimbola is an analyst with the AfriInvest Securities. Well, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we will continue with our preview of the MPC decision. Just stay with us.